Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. On the agenda tonight, we're going back to 1979. We're going to be taking a look at Kate Bush and she's going to be performing Wuthering Heights. And this is coming from the original tape recording, so due to the nature of tape, we're going to get some pitch inaccuracies throughout the performance, but it's not too bad. Let's get Kate up on screen and see how she gets on.
You had a temper like my jealousy, too hard to breathe. How could you leave me when I needed to possess you? I hated you, I loved you too. Mountains in the lights, you told me I was going to lose the fight. Leave the high and walk through.
I'm just going to jump in here because recently on this channel I've been featuring female artists, and when we're talking about female artists and originality, Kate Bush is right up there. Across the board in terms of her voice, the image, the stage performance as well, because this is something that, especially at the time when Kate broke onto the scene, all the bands were very visually stimulating in terms of the show that they put on. And we can see here that the band are in darkness and it's all about the show. We've got the dry ice, we've got everything to really build the atmosphere on stage. And Kate, the way that she's performing to the crowd, is a totally different level of artistry because she's starting to combine dancing, miming, singing, acting, all of these things that are happening on stage. And if you've been watching this channel for any length of time, you'll know that I feature guitar players and singers that play guitar as well, lead guitarists especially. And with this performance, we're going to get a treat because Alan Murphy is on lead guitar and he played with Kate and Level 42 and Go West. But listen to some of his technique that's going to be coming in at the end of this video, at the end of this performance, because we can get stuck into that as well. But Kate is the focus of this video because of the impact that she had, certainly here in the UK, and she did chart over in the USA as well, but she was such an original by bringing together so many different elements. And one of those elements is the vocal, because there is a reason that you don't see people going on talent shows and auditioning with Wuthering Heights, because of the vocal. When we analyze it, Kate has got that ability to pick the pitch perfectly, and sometimes it can be like shooting in the dark, trying to make sure you nail a pitch when you're not working your way up to it, maybe through a scale, and you can sometimes hit those notes more accurately because you've got to build up to it that is really predictable, and you might be used to it from singing scales and practicing. But in this track, Kate's melody jumps all over the place, and the other thing that she's got is a vibrato that isn't wide. So it means that sometimes when you are singing, if you're trying to hit a note, you can encapsulate that note in your vibrato. You don't have to be really accurate. Whereas Kate, throughout this song, and this is live, so she's nailing it here live, but also on the studio take, you can tell that when somebody gets it down in the studio and performs it this well live, it was just a one take in the studio, because Kate has got that ability to really pull out those pitches just on a dime, as you'd say in the USA. And just to help emphasize that point of being so accurate pitch-wise, imagine somebody singing this song and being slightly off with every single note where the melody changes. It would just make a mockery of the song. And the only reason this sounds as good as it does is because of Kate's vocal ability. And when I talk about true artists on this channel, Kate is a prime example of that, because at the age of 11, she started playing the piano and she studied violin as well, and she started writing songs. So she was already getting her musical identity at such a young age. She wrote 50 songs during her teenage years, and her family were sending that tape off with all 50 songs to record labels. Unfortunately, that got rejected, but a family friend called Ricky Hopper knew a particular guitarist from a band called Pink Floyd, and I'm talking about David Gilmour here, and he passed this demo over to David, and David really liked it. He saw some potential. So David footed the bill for Kate to get into the studio to record 3 tracks properly. And when she got into the studio, she then worked with the producer Andrew Powell, and she also had the technician Jeff Emmerich, who had worked with the Beatles previously. So she had a great team there. So it meant that Kate now had a demo that had top quality production on it and was going to sound really good to the labels. And this got sent off to Terry Slater at EMI Records, and she got signed off the back of that demo. So after signing this deal, the record label put Kate on a retainer, and the reason that they said they did this is because she was only 18 at the time. They felt that if they released an album and it didn't do very well, it would have really affected her confidence and maybe she would have never got over it. The other side of that is David Gilmour said that they just couldn't find the right producer to do the album. But anyway, so she had 2 years where she now just studied mime and she studied dancing and got into the theatrical aspects of the performance that she wanted to include as an artist. And she was performing live at this time in London pubs, and that was under the name KT Bush Band, and that was the letters KT. And in 1978, that's when she then released her first album, and that was called The Kick Inside. And interestingly, the record label EMI wanted to release James and the Cold Gun as the first single from that album, but Kate, being a true artist, said, we're not going to do that, we're going to release Wuthering Heights. And that was a great decision because it went to number 27 in the charts, and that album went on to sell over 1 million copies just in the UK, and it was an international number 1 as well because it got to number 1 in Australia, and it also set a couple of records because Kate then became the first female artist to get to number 1 with her own song. And she also became the first female artist to sell over 1 million albums of completely self-written material. So then, after the success of that debut album, the record label did what a lot of record labels do, which is force the artist to instantly record and release another album because of the publicity that that artist is enjoying at the time. And that's exactly what EMI did. And considering the first album was released at the beginning of 1978, by the end of 1978, she had another album, and that was called Lionheart. And the problem with this is being so rushed, it was always going to struggle. It did actually get to number 6, so it wasn't so bad, but Kate has said herself that she wasn't particularly happy with it. And something really important to mention here is that during this time, Kate set up her own publishing company and her own management company. And this is something that I always go on about in other videos, about keeping your rights and being independent and looking out for managers that set up management companies and then get you to sign a contract to that management company. Kate was switched on with the business side of things, and she got friends and family to run those businesses for her. So it meant that everything that Kate wrote, she owned. And this is such an important thing when you're talking about an artist like this, who makes albums worth of original material. There's no covers on there. So a really intelligent move at this point in her career, considering it's only the second album that she's done, and it's the same year that she's released her first album, so she's instantly got a hold on all of her rights as an artist. And people often don't understand the importance of this for the longevity of an artist's career, because in order to keep a career going, you've got to be able to finance it. You can't get into debt and start owing money to record labels. And by keeping the rights to everything, it meant that Kate could still finance future albums, and we will see also the other steps that she took in order to minimize cost with album production, but it was such an important move for her to do this early on. Let's get back into the performance. And there we have it. That was a great end guitar solo by Alan Murphy. I mentioned that earlier in this video to listen out for, because the control that he plays with, the vibrato that he's got control of as well, it is such a difficult thing to hold somebody's attention, especially a crowd's attention, with a guitar solo. And the lead tone that Alan had on his guitar was ideal for the sound because it had a little bit of distortion on there, but not too much. And it was just enough sustain on there to be able to hold those notes and get the vibrato. but it wasn't too much so that it then maybe crossed over genre into something hard rock. It's great to hear as well top musicians, and this is a great rendition of the track when you listen to that original record, because they've managed to get all of those elements in there live. And this is something certainly that Kate struggled with, or at least thought she would struggle with later in her career, getting albums and sometimes changing the sound of albums to make them more simplistic, more live, so that if she did go on tour, they'd be easier to replicate. And this performance was from the Hammersmith Apollo in London, 1979. Like I mentioned, they released an EP of these performances, and that was just called Live on Stage. And it was in 1980 that she released her next studio album, and that was called Never Forgotten. And the interesting thing about this album is when Kate first dipped her toes into co-production, because she co-produced this with John Kelly, and this album did really well as well. It reached number 1 in the UK, which again set another record, because that was the first time a British female artist had got to number 1 in the album charts in the UK. And a single from that album certainly that people would know here in the UK was Babushka, and that got to number 5 in the charts. And her fourth album, called The Dreaming, was released in 1982. And when I mentioned about the previous album being co-produced by Kate, this time she went the full hog and did it all herself. Unfortunately, it didn't sell really well, and it got a bit of a mixed reception. I think Kate sees it as one of her crazy albums, and just one of those that all artists have at some point. But it did reach number 3 in the charts initially, but unfortunately over the long term it didn't sell particularly well. And fast forwarding to 1985, that's when she released her 5th album, and that was called Hounds of Love, and that was a lot more successful than the previous one. And Kate also built her own studio so that she could cut costs of recording, but also work at her own speed. And that's something that definitely paid off, because this got to number 1 and it knocked Madonna's Like a Virgin off the top spot. Another interesting thing about this is when they talk about it being released, they say that it was released on record and cassette tape. So this is something that was really taking off at the time, and some kids now won't even know what cassette tapes are. But anyway, moving on, that was the same year that she recorded a track with Peter Gabriel, and that was called Don't Give Up. And that was a big hit here, because it made it into the top 10 of the UK charts. And another little interesting fact about that is when you hear that song, you can't imagine it being sung by anybody else other than Kate Bush. But Peter Gabriel initially asked Dolly Parton to sing that song with him, but she turned him down, and then Kate filled her shoes and stepped up to the plate. So it would have been really interesting, a lot more different to hear the way that Dolly would have sung it with her accent, but that's just the way that it went. And the song that was produced by Kate and Peter, I think was a great track, and it was very successful in the charts. And it was a busy year, because the same year she released her greatest hits album. And the interesting thing about that is that Wuthering Heights, she redid the vocals on that, and they totally reworked the backing, gave it a remix and made it sound a little bit better for that greatest hits album. And she also recorded Experiment 4, which was a new single, and the reason for that was just to draw a little bit more attention to that greatest hits album release. And in 1989 she released The Sensual World, which was her 6th album, and that was her biggest selling album in the USA, because that was certified gold, and it also went to number 2 here in the UK. So in 1993, The Red Shoes was released, and the previous album had done really well in terms of sales in the USA, and this one achieved her highest chart position. It got to number 28. It also got to number 2 here in the UK. And with the album, production had been watered down a bit, I think with a tour in mind, in order to get a more live sound, so that they could get the sound of the record live. But unfortunately that tour didn't come to fruition, and at this time, unfortunately, Kate lost her mother. Alan Murphy passed away as well due to pneumonia, and that was in relation to AIDS. So unfortunately it was a really tough time for Kate personally. And her 8th album was released in 2005, and that was called Ariel. So there was a 12-year gap between albums, and I think in the media she was seen as maybe a bit of an eccentric recluse, but she had a child, she had a son, and she was consistently still working on material. She did perform with David Gilmour, and she did Comfortably Numb with him in 2002, and in 2011 Director's Cut was released, and that was the 9th album, and that consisted of previously released songs that had been totally reworked to the point of even changing lyrics on there, having key changes. So it was taking those old songs and giving them a whole new lease of life. And in 2011, she released her 10th album, and that was called 50 Words for Snow. On that album, it had a duet with Elton John, and Stephen Fry also performed on that album. She was nominated for a Brit Award for Best Female Artist, and this album also achieved another record for Kate. It meant that she was the only female artist to have albums in the top 5 of the UK charts over 5 separate decades. She did an event before the dawn, which was a 22-night residency at the Hammersmith Apollo, and that sold out within 15 minutes. So she was still as popular as ever, and due to the publicity and the amount of attention that this set of gigs attracted, it meant that Kate was the first ever female artist to have 8 separate albums in the top 40 of the UK charts. But Kate Bush, what a unique artist in every sense of the word. Dance, poetry, obviously composing, and the show that she puts on here, it's no wonder that when she is playing live, those tickets sell out in next to no time. But thank you so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!